The painting I have chosen to discuss today is Mars and Venus, also known as Parnassus, by Andrea Mantegna. It was commissioned by Isabella d'Este in 1497, the same year it was completed. Isabella was known for her exceptional taste, and she was looked upon as a cultured woman with widespread interest. The painting was used by Isabella as a statement of her wealth and how a proper noble woman should spend her time taking in beautiful paintings and poetry. Mars and Venus was the first painting that Isabella commissioned to be placed in her studiolo, which is where she would entertain important guests. Studiolo. A studiolo, from the Italian meaning little studio, is a small room, often lavishly decorated, dedicated to reading, studying, and writing. It is generally of a relatively private character. One of Isabella's main goals was to obtain her very own Mantegna. Unlike the other artists that completed commission pieces for Isabella, Mantegna did not sign Mars and Venus. The painting spoke for itself. Mars and Venus is the first of a two-part allegory work that was commissioned by Isabella. The second being the Minerva expelling the vices from the Garden of Virtue that was finished before 1503. The genre of the painting is mythological. This led to the entire studiolo being decorated in mythological-themed paintings. The imagery of classical myth was important in the Renaissance. The appearance of mythological paintings in the studiolo made it possible for myth to have a place in the society of artists, collectors, authors, and readers in the 1500s. One of the most important long-term developments of the studiolo being decorated in this way is that mythological painting became its own genre. Mars and Venus standing at the top of the triumphal arch, which forms the top of the triangle with Apollo at the bottom left and Mercury and Pegasus at the bottom right. Some say that this is a scene that is described by Homer in the Odyssey, while others claim that it is based on a poem by Battista Fiera, who was a friend of Mantegna. Experts may have differing views on which poem is represented, but they do agree that this work is in fact based on a poem. The painting's various figures are all doing something different. Each figure is telling a different piece of the story. The lower half of the painting shows Apollo playing a lyre, while the 9 muses sing and dance. The muses are showing lots of movement with the way their bodies and clothes move to the music. The women are focused on the dance and the music and nothing else. They are not paying attention to what is going on around them. Some of the muses are even looking out of the painting to engage and draw in the viewer. They are wearing clothing that does not pop but blends in with the other colors that are being used. The second part of the bottom half is Mercury and Pegasus and the Hippocrene Spring. Mercury, along with some of the muses, Mars and Venus, are standing in the classic stance of contrapposto. Contrapposto, in which the standing human figure is poised such that the weight rests on one leg, called the engaged leg, freeing the other leg which is bent at the knee. With the weight shift, the hips, shoulders, and head tilt, suggesting relaxation with the subtle internal organic movement that denotes life. These figures are standing in somewhat naturalistic poses. It is possible to mimic the way they are standing without falling down or being in pain. Apollo is also in a natural sitting position. Mercury and Pegasus are in their own little world, looking into each other's eyes. Mercury has defined muscles, but they are not overdone. His muscles are natural and proportionate to his body. The next two parts of the painting interact with each other. The upper half of the painting shows Vulcan, which is Venus's husband, looking up to Mars and Venus with anger. Vulcan is standing in a legs-apart stance that is very unstable. It looks as though he could collapse at any second. The cave that Vulcan is standing in is dark with jagged rocks and exposed roots. It is an angry backdrop for an angry man that is watching his wife cheat on him with Mars. Mars, Venus, and Cupid are at the top of the rocky arch. Cupid is interacting with Vulcan by mocking him. Vulcan is watching Venus cheating on him, and there's nothing that he can do about it. He isn't even able to reach her. Mars and Venus's stance and demeanor are in contrast to Vulcan. Behind Mars and Venus is the bed where the adultery takes place. Lastly, I'm going to discuss the many different theories and interpretations that surround Mars and Venus, which makes it an exciting and interesting work to study. Some art historians say that the painting depicts a story from Homer's Odyssey, that the subject is the ancient conception of nature and its manifestation in the forms of poetic invention. Homer told the story of Mars and Venus to illustrate the tenderness from which nature or harmony are created. Renaissance interpreters saw the painting as a negative moral lesson or exemplum, featuring the seduction of Mars by Venus or the humiliating punishment of both by Vulcan. Exemplum, an example or model, especially a moralizing or illustrative story. It is difficult to pin down the precise poem of Battista Fietta's that inspired Mantegna, but many art historians agree that this poem is what inspired Mars and Venus. Art historians also point to the fact that Fietta and Mantegna were such good friends that Fietta would have been given complete access to Mantegna's studio. These friends would have spoken regularly and would have drawn inspiration off of each other. Fietta would have known Isabella, and in a poem he made a connection between Isabella and Venus. This was not well received, since Venus is being unfaithful to her husband, and he later apologized. Mantegna's version of the story is the most complex. Mantegna idealizes the lovers, even while their impending downfall is being foreshadowed. Because he uses poetic invention, where the subject of the painting itself becomes the poetry. Many different and complex interpretations of Mars and Venus exist, but a common theme that can be found in many of the interpretations is poetry. It is hard to doubt that Mars and Venus is in some way connected to poetry, whether it be depicting a poem by Homer, Battista Fietta, or Mantegna using poetic invention.